So, how do I look?
Kind of like a raggy, hairy bone.
Mike, you can come out now.
Oh, boy.
Mickey, come on. Peter, ah! Are you all right?
Remember when NBC handed 4 mismatched musicians a TV show in 1966, and somehow the whole thing exploded into one of the biggest pop culture machines of the decade? You had Micky Dolenz with the wild energy, Davy Jones as the heartthrob, Mike Nesmith bringing the dry wit under that wool hat, and Peter Tork as the sweet offbeat soul of the group. On paper, it really shouldn't have worked, but on screen, it was something else entirely. The series only ran for 2 seasons and 58 episodes, but that was enough to crank out a pile of hit songs and enough monkey mania to make the music world very nervous. What started as a made-for-TV answer to Beatlemania somehow became a real phenomenon all on its own. Equal parts sitcom, pop experiment, and glorious 1960s chaos. Today we're going to count down 15 weird facts that you probably didn't know about the Monkees. From the casting call madness and near-miss auditions to fake stats, real chart records, and one reboot disaster that nobody asked for. But before we jump in, hit like and subscribe to Remember When for more retro TV deep dives. And share this video with that friend who still knows every word to Daydream Believer and won't apologize for it. Now, let's get into the countdown. Number 15, the band that was cast like a sitcom. Yeah. Well, before they were a real band, the Monkees were basically a casting call. Yep, one of the most commercially successful bands of the late 1960s, and they didn't start in a garage or a smoky club. They started in a TV producer's office. In 1965, producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider cooked up the idea for an American Beatles-style comedy series for NBC. Their first instinct wasn't to build the band from scratch, though. They wanted to cast an existing group. Their original pick? The Lovin' Spoonful, but John Sebastian had already signed the band to a record deal, which would have blocked Screen Gems from marketing the show's music. The deal's dead. So Rafelson and Schneider pivoted to casting individuals, and they already had one piece in place. Davy Jones had signed a long-term contract with Screen Gems in September of 1964, and he wasn't some random unknown. He'd already starred as the Artful Dodger in the Broadway production of Oliver.
Anywhere for your smile, everywhere I sing.
Earning a Tony nomination for Best Featured Actor in a Musical in 1963. Broadway royalty before the first Monkee ever played a note. Then came the ad. In 1965, Daily Variety and The Hollywood Reporter ran a casting call looking for, and this is their direct quote, 4 insane boys who were rock and folk musicians willing to act in a new TV series. 437 people showed up. 4 got the job. Nesmith was the only one who actually saw the ad and walked in on his own. Tork got tipped off by a friend who'd already auditioned and washed out. But we'll get to that story soon. And Dolenz? Well, he'd already starred as a child lead in the 1950s TV series Circus Boy under the name Mickey Braddock. By 1965, he was making the rounds at auditions when word reached him about the project. So one of the biggest bands of the 60s wasn't assembled in a rehearsal space, it was just assembled in a casting room. And that manufactured origin, it followed them everywhere. Number 14, the liquid paper connection. You want one of the weirdest rock and roll backstories ever? Michael Nesmith's mom invented liquid paper. Yes, that liquid paper. The little white bottle that saved every secretary in America from retyping an entire page over one typo. In the mid-1950s, Betty Nesmith Graham was a secretary at Texas Bank and Trust who got fed up with the new electric typewriters. The carbon film ribbons made it nearly impossible to fix mistakes cleanly. So she did what any artist would do. She mixed white tempera paint in her kitchen blender, poured it into nail polish bottles, and then started painting over the typos at work. She called it Mistake Out. And then she got fired in 1958 after the company name started showing up on bank correspondence where the bank's name should have been. But instead of falling apart, she went full-time on the business. She renamed it Liquid Paper and in 1979 sold the whole thing to Gillette for $47.5 million. Whew. A teenager named Michael had helped her bottle the stuff in the garage. And that teenager grew up to be the monkey in the wool hat. When Betty passed away in 1980, Nesmith inherited half of her estate, over $25 million. And here's where it gets interesting. At that point, he was essentially broke. Creditors were putting tags on the furniture. He went from that to inheriting a fortune overnight. And what he did with it? Well, he backed music projects, funded films, and executive produced the cult classic Repo Man, quietly building one of the most interesting post-Monkees careers in the business. Number 13, the monkey who almost became the Fonz. In 1973, Micky Dolenz auditioned for the role of Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli on Happy Days. By then, Dolenz was in a rough stretch. After the show ended in 1968, he'd been trying to reestablish himself as a serious actor, but Hollywood, they weren't having it. When he walked into an audition, casting directors would ask,
"What are you doing here?"
So when Happy Days came along, he went after the Fonzie role hard, and he got close. Really close. It came down to him and a then-unknown Yale School of Drama grad named Henry Winkler. Dolenz later said that Winkler spotted him in the waiting room and assumed that he already lost the part, because who's going to pick an unknown over a guy who'd already been on a hit TV show? The two eventually became good friends and have been laughing about it ever since. Height was part of the equation. Dolenz stands at about 6 feet tall and would have towered over Ron Howard and the rest of the cast. Marshall wanted the actors at roughly the same eye level, and Winkler, at 5'6", fit that frame.
Well, let me tell you something. You're not going anywhere, lady. The Fonz wants to dance.
But what finally sealed it was a producer who caught Winkler playing a leather-jacketed street kid in a low-budget film called The Lords of Flatbush, and vouched for him hard enough to change Marshall's mind. Dolenz never lost any sleep over it. He's been straightforward about that. Winkler owned the role in a way that he never could have matched. The New York attitude, the street-level cool, that wasn't something that you could fake from Southern California. Dolenz moved to England and reinvented himself as a producer and director. Winkler became the biggest TV star of the 1970s. A few inches and a low-budget film, and that's all it took to change both their lives. Number 12, the band almost had a terrible name. Before they were the Monkees, they were almost something else, and it wasn't good. Producers were trying to create a name that sounded British invasion ready, something punchy, slightly cheeky, easy to put on a lunchbox. One early contender? The Creeps. Ugh. Yeah, imagine NBC trying to sell that to parents in 1966. Oh, no, don't worry, honey, I'm just going to watch The Creeps. Yeah, right. Network execs reportedly decided that might sound a little too juvenile delinquent for primetime. Another option? The Inevitables, which sounds less like a pop band and more like a 10th grade debate team. It was reportedly meant to suggest that their fame was unavoidable, but it didn't exactly scream teen idol hysteria. So they landed on the Monkees. Of course, Monkees, which is a deliberate misspelling of monkeys, following the British invasion trend of playful, slightly altered band names. Simple, catchy, maybe a little irreverent, and infinitely better than explaining to your parents why you had a poster of the Creeps on your wall. And it gave them that instantly recognizable guitar-shaped logo that basically printed money. The Monkees it was, and somewhere a lunchbox designer breathed a huge sigh of relief. Number 11, the rejection that changed rock history. Now, if you want another one of those biggest what-if stories in rock history, here you go. In 1965, a 20-year-old Stephen Stills auditioned for the Monkees. Musically, he crushed it. The guy was already a serious talent. He was a strong songwriter, killer guitarist, legit folk credentials. But producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider were building a TV show, and television in 1965 had very specific ideas about what a pop idol should look like. Stills was rejected for two painfully superficial reasons. His teeth were noticeably crooked, and his hairline was already starting to thin. This project needed telegenic faces for close-ups, cute, youthful, poster-ready, and the producers decided that Stills didn't fit the visual mold. But here's the thing, they still liked him. They reportedly appreciated his personality and what they described as his open Nordic look. They even asked if he knew anyone with a similar vibe who might photograph better. Rude. Stills immediately recommended his friend and roommate from Greenwich Village, Peter Tork. Tork auditioned, and Tork got the part.
Didn't you ever have a crush on anybody?
Yeah, once.
So what did you do about it?
I took her to a Cub Scout meeting.
There may have been more to it than just looks, too. Screen Gems required cast members to sign away publishing rights to their original songs, and Stills reportedly wasn't willing to hand over that kind of control, so it might not have been purely just about the teeth. But the teeth and hair story stuck because it perfectly captures how much the Monkees were built for television first and music second. But what happened next is the part that nobody saw coming. If Stills had been cast, no Buffalo Springfield with Neil Young, no For What It's Worth, no Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Later Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Instead of being molded into a sitcom star, he became one of the defining musicians of his generation, and the first person ever inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice in the same night in 1997. All because his teeth apparently weren't TV ready. Number 10, the ones who didn't make it. And when the Monkees ran that casting call in 1965, hundreds showed up. And a few names on that almost list might make your jaw drop. Harry Nicholson didn't make the band, but he impressed the producers enough that they bought his songs. Cuddly Toy ended up on Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited, helping establish Nicholson as a serious songwriter and launching a career that would later produce Without You and Everybody's Talkin'. Paul Williams also auditioned, yes, the future songwriter behind We've Only Just Begun, Rainy Days and Mondays, and Rainbow Connection. He didn't get the part, but he went on to become one of the most successful songwriters of the decade anyway. And Danny Hutton, he didn't make the cut either, but he went on to form Three Dog Night, which dominated early 70s charts. Now, I'm going to clear one rumor up. No, Charles Manson did not audition. It's a persistent urban legend, but Manson was in prison during the 1965 casting calls. And here's the kicker. The guy who started that rumor? Micky Dolenz. He made an offhand joke about it on a podcast, and the entire internet just took it as gospel. Number 7, the black box they were kept in. Now, here's one of the strangest behind-the-scenes details of the Monkees. By season 2, producers had a problem. 4 increasingly rebellious stars who, between scenes, would wander the lot, they'd crack jokes, disappear, and occasionally let the smell of something suspicious drift across the studio. Anything but stand by quietly. So the studio built what became known as the Black Box, a soundproof, windowless, air-conditioned room constructed beneath the soundstage. One door with a meat locker handle. Inside, a few pillows, couple candles, and a bank of 4 light bulbs on the wall. One for each Monkee, with their name underneath. When your light flashed, you were due on set immediately. The official reason was efficiency, but the real reason? Well, studio executives didn't want those long-haired musicians wandering about the Columbia lot between takes. Now, was it literally a prison? No, but symbolically, it hits a nerve. Here were 4 guys playing a free-spirited band on TV while sitting in a windowless holding room beneath the soundstage, owned by the studio, scheduled down to the minute, waiting for a light bulb to tell them when they were needed. And yet, here's the irony. Inside that box, they bonded, they jammed, they developed that tight shorthand and vocal harmonies that would later fuel their push for creative control. What started as a studio efficiency move became a pressure cooker, and accidentally a rehearsal room for becoming a real band. Number 8, 4 number 1 albums in a single year. Yeah, that happened. Now here's a record that still stands to this day, and it belongs to a band that half the music industry refused to take seriously. In 1967 alone, the Monkees landed 4 separate albums at number 1 on the Billboard 200. The Monkees, More of the Monkees, Headquarters, and Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited. Now, 4 number 1 albums, 1 calendar year, and no other act, not even the Beatles, not Elvis, not anyone has ever matched that. And the singles kept pace. Last Train to Clarksville, I'm a Believer, and Daydream Believer all hit number 1 on the Hot 100. I'm a Believer, written by Neil Diamond, parked itself at the top for 7 weeks and became one of the biggest selling singles of the entire decade.
Now I'm a believer.
More of the Monkees alone spent 18 weeks at number 1, sold over 5 million copies in the US, and finished 1967 as the best-selling album of the year, during one of the most competitive stretches in all of music history. The TV show ran every week. Kids watched the episodes, and then they ran out and bought the records. It was a feedback loop that made Cole Gem's records very, 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 very rich. And at their peak, record sales were outpacing the show's own ratings. Now here's the part that's been repeated so many times it feels like fact. Spoiler, it isn't. For decades, you've probably heard this one. In 1967, the Monkees outsold the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined. It's been printed in Rolling Stone, The Washington Post, books, documentaries, and about 1,000 YouTube comments. But there's only one problem. Michael Nesmith totally made it up. In a 1977 interview, Nesmith casually told the journalist that the Monkees had sold over 35 million records in 1967, more than the Beatles and Rolling Stones combined. The reporters wrote it down and printed it just as fact, but Nesmith later admitted that it was a total fabrication. His words were, quote, complete fabrication, totally bogus, Class A mendacity lie. He even retold the whole story to Gilbert Gottfried in 2015, clearly still amused that it worked. And here's the thing, the truth was already impressive enough. The Monkees did outsell the Beatles in U.S. album sales in both 1966 and 1967. They released more material. They had a weekly TV show driving purchases. And More of the Monkees was the best-selling album of the entire year. They were legitimately the biggest-selling act in America for a stretch. But the combined with the Rolling Stones part, the 35 million figure, that's pure Nesmith mischief. And the music press, they ran with it for almost 50 years. Hey, quick pause. Which Monkee was your favorite? Micky, Davy, Mike, or Peter? Drop it in the comments, and while you're down there, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss our next trip back into TV history. Number 7, The Wrecking Crew Secret and the showdown that changed everything. Now here's something the Monkees fan club newsletter definitely wasn't advertising. The band barely touched their own chart-topping albums. The first 2 records were built almost entirely by professional songwriters and the Wrecking Crew, the same elite session musicians who played on records for the Beach Boys, Frank Sinatra, half of 60s radio. The Monkees showed up, they sang lead vocals, and then went home. That was the deal, and for a while, it worked. Music supervisor Don Kirshner ran the operation like a hit factory. Boyce and Hart, Jack Keller, Jeff Barry handling production, and the record, sold millions. But the band hated it. Things came to a head in January of 1967 when Kirshner released more of the Monkees without even telling them. No input on the track list, no approval of the cover photo, which had been pulled from a promotional shoot without the band's knowledge, and the liner notes? It was pure Kirshner self-congratulation with barely a mention of the actual band. The Monkees didn't even get a copy. They had to buy their own album from a record store. So Michael Nesmith had had enough. During a confrontation with Kirshner at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Nesmith punched a hole in the wall and reportedly told him, "That could have been your face." Kirshner didn't take the hint. He went ahead and released a single in Canada without approval from the band, the producers, or the record execs. That was the last straw. Kirshner was fired, and the Monkees finally had full creative control. So what did they do with it? Headquarters, their first album where they actually played their own instruments.
Say you told me.
It was produced by Chip Douglas. It hit #1 for exactly 1 week before getting knocked off by the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Awesome album. Now, the one time that they proved that they were a real band, the greatest album in rock history showed up and parked right on top of them. Headquarters spent the next 11 weeks stuck at #2 throughout the entire Summer of Love. But the unity didn't last. By the time they were recording The Byrds, the Bees, and the Monkees in 1968, the group had splintered creatively. Instead of working together as a band, each member was off doing his own thing, recording solo tracks that all got released under the Monkees' name. They fought for creative control, and they got it, and then promptly used it to go in 4 completely different directions. Ain't that Hollywood? Number 6, the Three Stooges' DNA. Now, a surprising amount of what you saw on screen in the Monkees was borrowed, literally. Now, both the Monkees and Three Stooges were produced under Screen Gems, a division of Columbia Pictures, which meant that the show had a secret weapon, an entire studio back catalog of props, sets, and wardrobe just sitting there, waiting to be raided. And when your TV budget is held together with just tape and optimism, you use what's in the building. The show filmed on Columbia Pictures' lot, the same Hollywood ground where the Stooges had cranked out 190 shorts over more than 2 decades. Sets were redressed versions of older Columbia productions. Mad scientist labs, chaotic living rooms, banquet halls. The same sets would show up episode after episode in different configurations. If it looked like the Monkees' world was built out of spare parts, well, that's because it was. In a couple of Season 1 episodes, Peter Tork showed up wearing pajamas with a bunny design on the front. Now, those weren't custom made for the show. They were the same pajamas worn by Curly Howard in a Stooges short from the early 40s. The sweet, naive monkey wearing Curly's actual pajamas almost 25 years later. Not because anyone planned a tribute, but because it was the costume closet and the budget said, well... Number 5, Head, the psychedelic middle finger that nobody saw. In 1968, the Monkees did something no one saw coming. They made a movie designed to destroy their own image. The film was called Head, and it was the complete opposite of their squeaky clean NBC sitcom.
Hey, what's wrong?
What's wrong with you?
I asked you first.
I ordered this and I don't want it.
So throw it away.
Gone were the sped-up chase scenes and beach house antics. In their place, surreal imagery, non-linear storytelling, Vietnam-era undertones, and a whole lot of, what did I just watch energy. Now, the whole thing started at a resort in Ojai, California, where the band, Bob Rafelson, and Jack Nicholson spent a week brainstorming ideas into a tape recorder. Now, Nicholson, who was at that point a struggling writer-actor that most people hadn't heard of, took those tapes and turned them into a screenplay. The movie openly mocked the Monkees' manufactured origins, dismantled their bubblegum personas, and basically dared the audience to take them seriously. And then, nobody showed up. Part of that was by design, sort of. The original movie poster didn't feature the Monkees at all. No band photos, no name recognition, just a close-up of some random guy's head. And if you were a Monkees fan scanning the theater listings, you'd have zero idea that this movie existed. Roger Ebert summed it up pretty cleanly. Fans were offended by it, and non-fans stayed away entirely. The result? Head grossed a whopping $16,111 on a $750,000 budget. That's the equivalent of paying your mortgage with change you find between your couch cushions. And here's what makes it even wilder. Nicholson's very next project was Easy Rider. The guy who co-wrote the biggest box office disaster in 1968 turned around and helped launch one of the most important films of the decade. Davy Jones was particularly blunt about it. He later reflected that the band felt like pawns in something that they'd helped create but couldn't steer, thrown into something that had already gotten away from them. Now still, the movie eventually did find an audience and became a cult favorite, and it earned a Criterion Collection release. It's now considered one of the most fascinating oddities of 60s cinema. But in 1968, it was a psychedelic middle finger that almost nobody caught. Number 4, NBC's worst pilot. The original pilot for the Monkees tested so poorly, it set a record. The lowest test scores of any pilot in NBC history. The pilot had been shot in late 1965 on a shoestring budget. The guys wore their own clothes in most scenes because there was no money for wardrobe. So, yeah, the production values were about what you'd expect. But the bigger problem was the format. This fast-cut, chaotic, almost slapstick-style confused test audiences. They didn't know who these guys were. Why should they care? Or why even were they watching? So producer Bob Rafelson did something pretty smart. He re-edited the pilot and added something to the front. Test screen footage, loose, candid, almost documentary-style clips that let viewers actually meet these guys before the madness kicked in. And, well, it worked. The recut version scored one of the highest pilot test ratings that NBC had ever seen. Same footage, just different framing, and a completely different outcome. NBC was so convinced, they ordered 2 full seasons on the spot. For a show that had been dead in the water weeks earlier, that was unheard of. And once the show hit, it hit hard. Number 3, the Monkees basically invented the music video. The music video era didn't start with MTV, it actually started right here. Every episode featured at least one musical romp, a self-contained performance sequence that often had nothing to do with the plot. The story would pause, the song would kick in, and suddenly you were watching something that looked more like a mini-film than a sitcom. And these weren't static stage performances. Rapid-fire editing synced to the beat, jump cuts, sped-up footage, fourth wall breaks, location montages. Chaotic, stylish, and about 15 years ahead of where the rest of television was sitting. Those weekly romps turned singles like I'm a Believer and Last Train to Clarksville into full-blown pop events. The show proved that television could supercharge record sales by pairing songs with memorable visuals, and in doing so, accidentally wrote the blueprint for the modern music video. The thread runs even more directly than that, though. In the late 1970s, Michael Nesmith created Pop Clips, a cable program that featured music videos introduced by on-air hosts, making it one of the first American shows to use what would be later called VJs.
Hi, I'm Jack Armstrong, and this is Pop Clips, where the music is in motion. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to have some of the most incredible active rock and roll for you today that you could ask for on television.
The executives who saw it knew immediately what they had, and the concept got picked up, developed, and on August 1st of 1981, launched as MTV. And Nesmith wasn't done yet. His 1981 video project, Elephant Parts, won the very first Grammy Award for Best Video Album, helping legitimize music video as its own art form. Then, in 1986, MTV aired a Monkees marathon. A whole new generation discovered the show that had quietly invented the format they'd grown up watching. The Monkees started it. MTV just gave it a channel. Number 2, the cancellation that wasn't. The Monkees wasn't canceled the way that most people think. When the show ended in 1968 after 2 seasons, it wasn't because the ratings tanked or NBC suddenly declared war on prefab pop bands. The real story's a bit messier and a lot more interesting. By season 2, the band had been fighting hard for creative control, writing their own material, playing their own instruments, and steering the music their way. But the TV show was still built around zany slapstick. The group was getting just a little jaded with the same formula week after week. So when talks about a 3rd season came up, the Monkees pitched changing the format entirely. They wanted like a variety show, something closer to Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Not another round of scripted hijinks where Davy falls for a girl, Peter gets kidnapped, and Mike just stands there looking mildly confused about all of it. And NBC, they said no, you stick with the format or we're done. And the Monkees, they chose done. But this wasn't just stubbornness on either side. Key sponsors had already began pulling back during season 2, which didn't exactly help the renewal conversation. And when the band was already deep into filming Head, that psychedelic middle finger that you heard about earlier, well, their attention was somewhere else entirely. So calling it a cancellation is technically accurate, but it was more of a mutual breakup, where both sides were already seeing other people. Now, for a group that started as a manufactured TV experiment, choosing to walk away on principle, that's a pretty solid mic drop. And number 1, from MTV Resurrection to the new Monkees disaster. Now, on February 23rd of 1986, MTV aired a nearly 23-hour marathon of the original series to celebrate its 20th anniversary. They called it Pleasant Valley Sunday. It was supposed to be just a nostalgia filler, but instead, it sparked Monkee Mania 2. Teenagers who weren't even alive in the 60s fell in love with the band. MTV and Nickelodeon started running episodes daily. Multiple Monkees albums re-entered the Billboard chart simultaneously. The manufactured band was again outselling most current acts. Micky Dolenz, Davy Jones, and Peter Tork reunited for a massive tour that became one of the top-grossing live acts of 1986. They even scored a brand new top 20 hit with That Was Then, This Is Now, though Davy Jones sat that recording out, leaving Dolenz and Tork to carry it. It was chaotic, unexpected, and it was completely real. And then Hollywood, of course, tried to bottle it. In September of 1987, a reboot called The New Monkees premiered.
Hi,
we're New Monkees.
right you are, Larry. We made this tape especially for our friends at Warner Brothers.
New cast, new house, but same premise. Out of roughly 3,000 applicants, producers selected Jared Chandler, Dino Kovas, Marty Ross, and Larry Saltis. Unlike the originals, these guys were picked primarily for their existing musical chops. And their setup? A garishly neon mansion with an electric butler and a talking computer named Helen. Not exactly the beach house that America had fallen in love with 20 years earlier. And behind the scenes, the project was also crippled by a classic Hollywood disconnect. The TV series was produced by Columbia Pictures Television, while the album was released by Warner Brothers. Each side waited for the other to create momentum. And promotion stalled. There was no unified push. And to make things messier, the original Monkees sued over the use of the name. The dispute was eventually settled out of court, but the optics were just terrible. 22 episodes were planned, only 13 aired. In the span of 1 year, the Monkees went from one of the biggest nostalgia comebacks in MTV history to a reboot so unwanted that it evaporated almost instantly. And there you have it, guys. 15 weird facts that you didn't know about the Monkees. Which one surprised you the most? And which Monkees moment still lives rent-free in your head? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe for more nostalgic deep dives, and share this video with someone who still hears, "Hey, hey, we're the Monkees," and immediately starts singing along. Until next time, this is Remember When.